Listeners in the UK will know that there's a petrol shortage on at the moment. We have had a run on petrol because, well, I'll come back to it later on perhaps, but it does mean that Car has not ventured out with me this week to get to a destination I was hoping to go to, which was a little further away than usual. I thought I'd do the responsible thing and stay fairly close to home, thereby allowing those that really need the petrol to be able to fill up. Doing my bit, so to speak. But I do want to say that a box arrived last week, not for once closed via Hermes, nor the nasty kind of box that heralded a grisly end in the... Hang on a minute, I should concentrate here because I'm just going across a rail line. Look left, look right. Anything coming? Nope. It's quite a fast line, this one, so you do have to be you have to have your wits about you a bit. So, sorry, boxes, yeah. Not for once closed via Hermes, nor the nasty kind of box that, excuse me, that'll be the gate then, that heralded a grisly end in the film Seven. You know the bit where Morgan Freeman implores with Brad Pitt not to peek. What's in the box? Don't look in the box. What's in the box? Don't look in the box. No, but it was the kind of box that you stay in for. The one where you wash and shower to receive it. The kind of box delivery that you note in your diary. The one where every time you hear a van door slam just outside the house, you rush to the peephole. Is that for me? Is that the box? Is that Dave from DPD? Go on, Neil, what's in the box? Well, I'll tell you. This. I'm toting a new toy today. Bought, of course, from mpb.com with my own money, as YouTubers making independent review videos say. It's the Samyang, or if you're in the States or Canada, I'll be saying a Rokinon 12mm wide angle to fit onto my X Pro 1. So now I have the fabulous 28mm vintage lens from my friend Tim Binder in America land, which after a little mathematics, down to the crop factor of APS-C is about 42mm length, which a few street shooters are now saying is their favourite focal length. Sitting in that land between, that's about as close as I want to get, thank you, 35mm war photographer prime land, and the, I just want to be like Cartier-Bresson 50mm land. 42. Oh, look at that. It's that time of year, isn't it? Everything's moving south, don't blame you. At least you don't need to go and fuel up at the pumps. Morning. Morning, after you. God, that's a horse.
Cheers,
gorgeous. But 42mm, or as, sort of near as damn it to 50, is good focal length, and I used it really nearly all last winter for these photo walks, but often I couldn't get the whole scene in as I walked, and unless I trekked back 100 feet or so, found myself across a road, invariably behind something with an obscured view. So now I've got Samyang's manually focusing 12mm or 18mm in 35mm maths. That's about right, isn't it? No, Neil, it's not. It's 18.25. Oh, I knew you'd correct me. But it arrived good as new in the description from mpb.com. Sorry, sounds like an advert. Kind of is, really. And the description was practically whimpering by me through its puppy dog eyes and a computer screen. Its last owner has moved on, it seems. And it went to the lens pound, or MPB if you will. So I picked it up, and it's going to get lots of new love and use in my bag, proving that a lens is not just for Christmas. What, Neil? But I'm an iPhone user who likes to listen to a photography show that doesn't get overly techie. I know we started in a techie way, but bear with me. Apologies, but it's exciting seeing the world, or more of the world through this thing. I just need to be cautious I don't become a bit wide-angle-tastic. So tell me off if I overuse said toy, although I have a feeling that today's pictures that I share on the show page of my walk, my sketchbook pictures, as I'm now calling them, I think they're going to be wide angle today. They'll be off the 12mm. So then, who's guesting on this episode? Well, we have two guests with us on this walk today. First up, chapter 1. It'll be Valerie Jardin, who I'm delighted to have on the show. as I get to prove to my former French teacher that I can pronounce words and names en français, but moreover, street photographer, travel photographer, fine art photographer. She presents workshops in France and, Paris and Rome, New York City. I mean, what's not to love? And in Chapter 2, I speak with Keith Moss, professional photographer, 35 years, and a trusted mentor to many.
Today on the Photowalk.
You can't grow in the craft by looking at other people's work. It's going to be nice for inspiration, but that's not going to make you a better photographer.
When you're reading body language, it transcends verbal language. So a lot of my stuff is abroad, is places like Istanbul. I don't speak Turkish, I don't speak German, I don't speak Romanian where I go, I don't speak Spanish. But yeah, I'll still connect with all these people and get really interesting images of who they really are as a person.
Well, you don't get to photograph for 35 years and not have a story or 9 to share. Keith Moss in Chapter 2 and Valerie Jardin in Chapter 1 talking about working as a documentary photographer. It's the only photography show like this in the podcast sphere, and you're part of it. A photo walk, where I invite you to walk with me, just with our cameras, taking along your letters, your DMs, your Facebook messages, which drive the show. Lots of thoughts, lots of creative insight. Also, we'll be hearing from former guests with snippets of inspiration, or should I say inspiration. Sean Tucker on creativity and why we're a little precious about what that means. More from Matt Searles on mindfulness. A shared inspirational snippet with former paramedic Ian McDonald, now a photographer and speaker, about mindfulness and the mental benefits of photography. Plus, we're getting excited about being on the open road in a van with Ryan Visions. So, if that's not enough, what are we talking about today? Well, I shall tell you in a moment. First of all, I'd like you to think about change. We're supported by our friends at mpb.com, the number one platform in the UK, the US and Europe, with bases in all the Bs, Brighton, Brooklyn, Berlin, when it comes to buying, trading or selling quality used kit online. It's true that a picture, a moment, can change the way we feel. We talk so often about that on this show. It can change how we see ourselves. It can change our understanding and the rules. mpb.com puts photo and video kit into more hands more sustainably, helping you to change kit to tell your stories. Every month, visual storytellers sell more than 20,000 cameras and lenses to MPB, which means that you can choose used and get affordable access to kit that won't cost the earth, and in some cases, you never dreamt you'd own. So, sell the kit you're not using. Trade it in for the kit you need to create. Buy used, spend less, and get more when you go to mpb.com. So, today, I have a letter that, both touched me and amazed me in its honesty and story, and it was written by someone who doesn't even claim to be a photographer yet. All will be revealed. We talk about the pleasure of owning and using should we call it a real camera, how our art and what we make pictures of helps us find mindfulness. We talk about positivity and why all the money in the world doesn't necessarily buy it. We learned from a photographer about how cracks in the wall might just become his fine art future. I have a warning about keeping your camera bags zipped up, especially if you go bushwalking in Australia, and of course our inspirational shorts too that I mentioned a moment ago. Shall we walk then? Coffee and Garibaldi's packed? Check. Boots on? Check. Long socks or leggings? You want to avoid those nasties in the undergrowth? Check. Spare batteries, cards or film? Check. Earbuds in? Check. Lens caps off? Let's walk. Well, if the introduction's anything to go by, it's going to be a longish walk today. Buckle up. Hope you got your Garibaldis and your coffee ready. We're on a jaunt today, I think. A very international flavour to the show last week. We actually start in Stockholm for this week's show. And we're going to start with the patron of the day from Stockholm. Look at that, double bubble. One here, a letter from Theodore Stanner. Good evening, Neil and team. If you're wondering who this team that people... Hang on, I just need to get through this gate. If you're wondering who this team is that people talk about, here we go. Then perhaps I should explain. It's modest. We have Neil Ford, who you may have met in the Facebook group because he admins it, and he looks after anything that goes wrong when IT, or more specifically, my IT, falls down. I call him, he sniggers, puts his feet up on the desk, presses something only IT people know about, and hey presto, bing, sorted within 5 minutes. Magical. And then we have Emily Rainier, who recently joined us. But then there are others, I mean, you know who you are, who roll up their sleeves and get stuck in with ideas and mentoring and sometimes interviews and guests. So you're all part of this team, but don't start asking for pay. We're not quite at that level yet. I can send you a Garibaldi biscuit if you so request, but you need to send a stamped addressed envelope. That's Blue Peter. That's a kids' TV show used to say. Do you remember Blue Peter? Sorry, I'm getting digressed for a second. Theodore, bear with me, but I feel I need to explain Blue Peter now. It was a TV show. I don't know if there's a kind of an American or European or down under equivalent, but it was, I think still is actually, I think it's still on, isn't it? A children's TV magazine show that ran things like arts competitions as part of its programming, and we all sent our pictures in, very hopeful to see them appear on the TV, see if we could win. And they always would give the prize to a 3-year-old who'd effectively sneezed on a canvas. If you sent a stamped addressed envelope though, because they always used to say, if you want them back, send us a stamped addressed envelope. And they'd send your artwork back, sort of adding insult to injury really. Normally they'd fold it in half. Obviously I've not taken this to heart, as you can tell. Anyway, I've gone round houses, as they say. So back to Theodore, who sent some pictures that'll be on the show page this week. Here are my photos from my Photowalk and drive that I took with you. The first few street and landscape, perhaps touristy photos are from a port town just outside Stockholm on a glorious summer's day. The ones in the countryside, maybe a more appropriate location for a photography daily tuned photo walk, were taken catching up on the Sean Tucker episode that you did. I'm looking forward to ordering his book and reading his current mindset printed in the format of a book. A real tangible, hold it in your hands book. Anyway, on this photo walk episode, I particularly liked listening to your take on one of the questions you had in, the one about whether it even makes sense to own a camera nowadays with the super extra mega smartphones. I must admit I was struggling with the same question myself of late. I even went down the rabbit hole of YouTube and the internet for an answer to that question. I was able to find some eloquent answers, but I do agree with your take on it. Oh, agreeing with me? It's the human element behind the camera that matters. I'd also add, for me, photography is the joy of holding a beautiful piece of engineering art, which for me describes a camera. Putting it to your eye, pressing the shutter, hearing it clunk or click, and capturing the moment. However insignificant that moment may be. All the very best from Theodore. Thank you, Theodore. Usually, of course, when we have Patron of the Day, I pop up a link to a social feed or their website or Flickr account as a way of thank you. But Theodore says he's in between Instas at the moment, so he's just happy to support the show. So thank you, Theodore. I very much appreciate that. And I'll put your pictures on the website. That's a way of sharing your skill that I can do. But in terms of experience and engagement and film, well, I've been shooting a bit of film, as you know, of late, for the engagement that makes me feel like I'm doing something special, but not for anybody else, but for me. And I think sometimes we pressurize ourselves too much to think that we have to make it for the internet or for social, Instagram, Facebook, whatever, when actually these walks here, I take a lot of pictures, or I make a lot of pictures. Yes, language correct, please, Neil. But I don't post them all. There's a big file of them. There's a big folder of them, rather. But it's about experience and emotion, isn't it? What's before us, be that sort of beautiful vista-like scene that our mailman Matt Searles in New Zealand sees that we talked about last week, or a picture of our wonderful child who's just turned 16, as a good friend of the show, Anna McCarthy, shared on Facebook. They were lovely pictures. And then the third part of the, I suppose, sort of exposure triangle, as it were, is the camera, the thing that we use, isn't it? The way it makes us feel connected with the first two facets I was talking about, experience and emotion. And I know gear isn't everything, but you choose your camera often, don't you, for an emotional decision. Maybe it's film, all that sort of satisfaction of the clunk that we talked about, a kind of sound that heralds the decision to make a picture. Perhaps you've chosen a camera because, like this X Pro 1 that I'm carrying today, it's lightweight. Maybe you have a connection with it, a family connection. It was a rangefinder that belonged to somebody important to you, like a dad or a grandfather or grandmother, or mum. But there's a connection, isn't there, when you make a picture rather than grab a snap. And actually the book Echoes we talked about last weekend on the Patreon More show was all about that connection. So shall we hear from a recent guest? It seems pertinent to hear some inspirational words for a second from Sean Tucker, since Theodore mentioned the book he released this year called The Meaning in the Making, which is all about creativity. And Sean, who I like to think of now as a good friend of the show, and by extension, you as well. Well, he's one of those free-spirited creative thinkers, isn't he? Who's always got something precious to share. And here he is, mulling over what being creative means.
Yeah, I've always made things. As a teenager, I was sketching. That's what I loved to do. And in high school, I was heavily involved with music and also stage design. I did lighting for plays and stuff. And then coming out of that, it was big into music for a while and bands. And then it was public speaking with the church, which is a big creative pursuit, just to, putting something together and delivering a talk live. Then it was, getting into filmmaking and photography and then writing. And if you take any of those away from me, I'll find another thing. I don't think it's not the outlet that's the important thing. It's the fact that I get to keep making and participating in this. And I think we make creating too exclusive in the way that we talk about it sometimes, especially online, and this sort of label we apply, this person's a creative and that person isn't. Is a real misnomer, because I think we all have ways that we create and we make things, and some are more obvious and some are less obvious. But any time that you're sitting down trying to generate something out of nothing in your own voice, whatever that is, it could be mathematical formulas. People who say I'm not a creative person, but I problem solve in mathematics. Yes, you are. Like there's so many ways and so many. Certainly in this book, I'm using creativity as a very broad term that hopefully encompasses a lot of different things.
Sean Tucker. It's always a pleasure to speak to Sean, and I'm hoping, I still have to ask, of course, but I'm hoping to do a photo walk in York sometime with him. The last couple of days have been just rainy, and I did intend actually to go out and do a photo walk yesterday evening, but it just went boof. Just the rain dropped, and although I don't mind walking in the rain, and with winter on the way, I'm certainly going to have to, aren't I? But I thought, no, not this week. So I've come out. It's a glorious, it is early in the morning, this one, and it is glorious. The sun's really shining. Hardly a cloud. There's some high wisps, but hardly a cloud in the sky. And I'm with my X Pro 1. Now, seasoned listeners to this show will know that I like to make pictures as we're walking and talking. So let me pop you in my pocket, because this towpath here, beautiful contrasty scene ahead of me, and I've got the wide angle on, and look, I found we were in the woodland last week, weren't we? We were in the woodlands because of the episode all about woodland photography with Simon Baxter. Wasn't he a fantastic guest? And I found this tree's really gnarly, and it's just got this fabulous shape, and I want to get a picture for my photo walk story today. So let me pop you in the pocket, and I can still talk to you while I'm making a picture. So there we go. What have we got then? It's a very sunny day. So I'm on ISO 400, manually focus. Everything's in focus, being at sort of f11. with a wide angle. I'm not even sure I really need to worry about focusing. Here we go. Lovely scene here. Shutter speed of 2/50th. F11. One more for luck. Let's take you out of the pocket. So, just one of the things that I love about editing and presenting this very different kind of photography show is how I get to follow up on ideas and comments made, and they become like last week's word of the week. They become a word of the week. Last week's word of the week was story, wasn't it? So here are some thoughts from Matt Searles to follow last week's show. Matt is a photographer and cafe owner in New Zealand's Mesopotamia, a cafe that came from a mail run that takes him and his camera through a valley called Rangitata. Now, last week we heard about Matt's photographic inspirations as he makes his pictures of these extraordinary mountains, and they really are. I mean, I just every turn would be a picture, wouldn't it? So he's very, very lucky to live in that part of the world to make the pictures that he does. He takes this sort of 100-kilometre round journey to deliver his mail. And this week there was something that, for positive reasons, raised my eyebrows in our private Facebook group, which you're very welcome to become a part of. And if you aren't yet, come on in. The water's warm, as they say. Isn't that the expression? So from Matt, this week he says, I've been thinking a lot about mindfulness and photography and how the practice of our chosen art aligns with the principles of mindfulness, namely being in the moment, an awareness of your inner peace and its place in the surroundings. I've just finished, he says, listening to an amazing audiobook, The Resilience Project by Hugh van Cuylenburg, which has made an immediate impression upon me. Just so I can give you an idea of what this book is, by the way, because you might be thinking, oh, what's that book, Neil? That's a new one. Of course, I'll link to it in the show notes today, but I'll give you a couple of reasons why it may have captured Matt's imagination, or attention, rather. So I went to the site, which is, as I say, linked to in today's show notes. Hugh van Cuylenburg was a primary school teacher, volunteering in northern India when he had a life-changing realisation. Despite the underprivileged community the children were from, they were remarkably positive. Hang on. Here come some joggers. Stand by, second part coming. Morning.
Good morning. It's nice now.
Ah, no, it's lovely, isn't it? Faster, faster. Why do I always say something stupid when runners go past? It would have been perfectly reasonable for both of them to pick me up and throw me in the river here. Work on that, Neil. Yes, I am. It's a bit like a dog that can't stop chasing buses. Whenever runners go by me, I feel I need to chivvy them along as if they were in the London Marathon. Where were we anyway? By contrast, back in Australia, yes, we were talking about Hugh, weren't we? Finding that these children had these remarkably positive outlooks on life, despite not having everything, and certainly what many of our children have. By contrast, back in Australia, Hugh knew that all too many people found it hard to be happy or suffered from mental illnesses such as depression and anxiety. How was it that young people he knew at home, who had food and shelter, friends and a loving family, struggled with their mental health, while these kids seemed so contented and resilient? He set about finding the answer, and in time came to recognise the key traits and behaviours that these children possessed were, here we are, this is the meaning of life moments, gratitude, empathy, and mindfulness. So that's what the book is about, and I've added it to my reading list. Not only that, I sat down and wrote a whole load of notes about how I can make that a part of this show. Anyways, back to Matt. As part of my daily journal, Matt says, I've decided to include photography in my quest to improve my mental health. Not a long bow to draw, considering I take photos each day on my mail run, which in itself has quite an impact on elevating my mood. Who can't feel moved by majestic scenery after all? But the serenity of my mountain valley is also a good place to take stock of the day, shut out the cares and the worries, and just be. And it's this being in the moment that's helped me make this picture this evening, which I will include on the show page. Honestly, this is the most extraordinary picture. I would have been so proud of this one. For you, Matt, you get to see this scene every day, and I think that's remarkable. In capital letters, shouted. It really is. But so you get to make these pictures, I know, but I would assume that every single one for you is special for different reasons. And as Matt continues, as somebody who lives with bipolar disorder, photography has been a place to find solace from my crazy world, full pun intended. After all, when I'm behind viewfinder, I can impart a sense of control on my life, which sometimes is sorely lacking in other areas. This week's been a good one so far, but I know that if things don't go too well, that my camera is there to help. Wow. I was so grateful that you shared this and what making these pictures means to you and why photography is important, particularly given the conversation about bipolar. And, Matt, it occurred to me that making this particular style of show, that does similar things for me, actually. There's something about taking this digital mail bag. See, it's a kind of mail run-ish, isn't it? Of sorts. Adding in my 2 pennyworth here and there, and importantly making some pictures. That's sort of the final sort of slowdown in the whole process. It's a kind of... I could be in danger of being a little bit overly poetic here and not finding the right metaphor, but a sort of darkroom experience in the light, if that makes sense. Anyway, do share your own stories, of course, as to what photography means to you in the context of mindfulness and being in the so-called moment with your camera. And thank you, Matt. And I'm going to make no apology for playing just a few more moments of my chat with Matt, despite having played an inspirational clip from him last week. But for some backstory, when I recorded this with Matt, it was night time for him in New Zealand. Such was the time difference. And he literally had to drive to a part of a remote community, stick his leg in a bucket of water and hold on to the side of his 4x4 to get a good signal. But I'm pleased we managed to connect, even though it was a trial at the time, wasn't it, Matt? So I'm going to do something unusual here. After you've heard a few more seconds from Matt, I'd like to play a few moments from a YouTube film that I made, it must be almost 6 months ago, maybe more, back in the studio where I talked with the Canadian photographer Ian MacDonald, who is a former paramedic who believes the mindfulness of photography literally healed his PTSD experience from years of working in exceptionally stressful situations and occupation. So Matt first, then we'll hear from Ian about the mindfulness of photography.
I guess one of the things that I really love about taking the camera with me on the mail run is that every day is a new opportunity to see something new, and every time I jump in the car and I take that drive up the road, I'm always thinking, okay, what's new today? What's different from yesterday? And I guess that's where that whole kind of PJ thing really comes in too, that you are always thinking about where's the story today, and also what's in my heart today, what do I feel, what do I want to capture? Do I want to capture movement or do I want to capture still life? So that's, all of those things I kind of take into account.
We spent a lot of time on that, on the importance of being mindful and living in the moment and really just experiencing what's happening around you. And photography, much like playing guitar or any other form of art, really complements that because it's a task where you can be just focused. You've got a composition in front of you, you've got a moment in front of you, and you really can just take the time to create the best image that you see in your mind. And everything else, all of the noise, all of the day-to-day clutter, it just isn't in your mind at that time. And I think that's really where photography helped me in a great way through the PTSD.
Ian MacDonald. And before Ian, some more words from Matt. Well, our first guest in a moment. I love, and I sincerely mean this, that from your letters and messages and the Facebook conversations, and especially the pictures that you send into the email address. Quick reminder, studio@photographydaily.show, 2,000 pixels on the wide side, please. I love that. I honestly feel that I learn, and I genuinely mean this, I learn new ways to see. Doesn't that hark back to the late, great and very, very much missed Steve Shipman, when he recounted his photographic mentor one day saying to him, Steve, you're looking, but you're not seeing. I'll never tire of repeating that, by the way. And it's letters like this one that have me think, there are lots of new ways to see, lots of new ways to open our eyes and see. And I've not thought or visualised this way before. So let me read this. Wonderful letter from Chris Wilkins. Hey, Neil. I have to start off by saying the podcast is simply lovely as always. Very flattering, thank you very much. I've been a listener for over a year now, but I've always been hesitant to share my imagery. Until now. On my Friday walkabouts, I've accumulated a sort of odd set of images, something I call city obscura. All right, let me explain. Street photography has always interested me, especially the mundane and everyday nonsense that doesn't get a second glance. So I turned my eye to surfaces and textures. And so Chris is talking here about the everyday concrete walls and the surfaces that we just walk on by, don't we? Past. They're there, they're in our eye line, but we don't notice them. Hang on a minute. Sorry, I'm digressing for a moment because there's a picture here. Bear with me. All the cows have come out. Are you expecting something to eat? I'm ever so sorry. I'm not that person that brings your food. But I do want to get a picture because you're absolutely gorgeous. Look at you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 30, 40 of you? And a lazy one in the middle. I can see you over there. Just having a sit down. Let me get a picture. Pop you in my pocket. There's some beautiful calves as well. Sun's actually gone in for a second. That was me saying how beautiful it was a moment ago. But here we go. Wide angle, which means you'll get all of them in. Get my best side, Neil. I'll do my best. You all look lovely. What are you talking about? Here we go. It's a sketchbook picture. Will any of you look at me? No, unless you got food. Oh, I see. What are we at? 2/50th. I know. Maybe it's 1/2/5. Is that what you meant? Okay. Yeah, you're right, actually. 1/2/5. ISO 400. F8. Sketchbook shot. And enjoy your breakfast when it comes. Yep, take you out of my pocket. Sorry, I digressed there, probably as an inopportune moment. Somebody was actually saying to me the other day, I like the way you digress. It's like we're having sort of a conversation as we're going along. Well, that is the idea. Hello, this is a better picture from this angle. How are you all? I know, I won't get too close because you've got some calves. Yeah, so I do digress. Where were we? Oh, yes, we were talking about Chris's, what does he call them? His city obscura images. So, in essence, these are the concrete walls, the textures, the patterns that we just walk on by. The very substances, says Chris, used to make architecture created murals of deterioration in the form of cracks and chipped paint and water damage. The natural designs in unnatural material constructed curious compositions. Whoa, you should be writing for museums. But I do get it. They remind me, says Chris, of an abstract painting, dependent on the use of shape and texture, light and shadow. And I tell you what, Chris, that they do. Who'd have thought that there's beauty in a concrete wall? It started to crack. To use a very simplistic example. Years ago there was a photographer who made, I think, a small fortune from selling pictures of cracks in concrete and walls and weathered surfaces. They were kind of a library, and he sold them as layers for texturing over portraits to give stuff a kind of a grimy, do you remember the grimy, grungy effect that people used to lay across? I think some people still do, and it can look quite effective, actually, across photographs. Hard to describe, but I think you get the idea. They were more an effect than a composition, that's for sure. But anyway, look, these I've put 9 examples on the show page today. These I honestly think, and I mean this, I could see these hanging in a gallery. And I'd go a little bit further, actually. If they were in a gallery, I'd like to hear some an element of sound to go with them. I'm thinking this sort of white noise being played quietly in the space where they're shown, sort of echoes of life going on around, sort of hollow sounds, almost like an underpass sound. You don't really know what it is. And I could just see these pictures hung in this gallery with these sounds going on in the background. Absolutely fantastic. And thank you very much. They'll be on the show page today. So, are you ready for today's guest then? 2 chapters. Chapter 1, since we have 2 chapters, I wanted this week to talk with 2 incredible mentors and street photographers for their take on, everything from mentoring to confidence, finding confidence in yourself to make street pictures. Valerie Jardin is my first guest this week, though she's going to return for a second part to this interview next week. But this week, I wanted to touch on the 2 facets I mentioned. As I say, she's a travel photographer, a fine art photographer, and hosts international photo workshops in places such as Paris and Rome and New York City. That has a ring, doesn't it? I saw a tea mug in a gift shop local to here with the place names Paris, New York and Thatcham. Funny, but not quite the same ring, of course. Anyways, it's wonderful to at last welcome Valerie Jardin onto the show. Valerie, there are 2 words used to describe your relationship to photography and the genre you choose. Documenting humankind, which I love. Did you know when you started out that this is what you wanted to do in terms of picture making?
Absolutely not, actually. I started photography quite late in life, and I wanted to be a wildlife photographer. So there you go. It's a different kind of wildlife.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I think documentary photography, or street photography, as people commonly refer to it, is a little bit like wildlife photography. So.
Well, we've talked about this before, actually. There's a wildlife photographer who suggested that don't spook the animals. And the animals can be, of course, those that you photograph on the street, as well as things that have lovely stripy shapes in the bush.
Absolutely. The difference being that you work with a very short lens versus wildlife photography when you usually have a long lens. So
Absolutely.
2 very big differences.
I did notice that you refer to photography as an addiction. And I think a lot of photographers do find that.
Oh, it's funny that you say that. I'm just back from teaching a workshop in France for a week, and one of my workshop attendees, it felt like I was watching me, because she is at that level of obsession about wanting to get the shot. We're difficult people to live with when we're with non-photographers. When we're with photographers, we totally get it. You know how you can be having dinner outside and all of a sudden you disappear. No one will think that's weird if you're among documentary photographer, because you saw a moment of everyday life that you just couldn't miss. But when you're with non-photographers, they don't get it. And we're at that level of obsession.
But what do your family feel?
Addiction.
What do your family feel then? Have they accepted the addiction?
They're totally understanding. And actually, when we're on family outing, I mean, I always have my camera with me. But for example, in July, after the family vacation in Normandy, spent a day in Paris. I hadn't been in Paris since the pandemic started. So I was like a child in a candy store, because Paris is my favorite city to photograph. And so it was like being back on my favorite playground. But it was a family day, and I didn't want to take any time from the family. So the challenge, it's about turning the frustration into a challenge. How many good shots can I have that are only going to be grab shots when I'm not even going to stop, basically, or spend 2 minutes waiting for the decisive moment? It's just going to be all grab shots. So if you turn it into a challenge, then it's okay. Otherwise, yes, it can get really, really frustrating. But I do this for a living because I teach workshops around the world, pretty much every month. So on a normal year. So, the least I can do when I'm with family is to, have the camera take the back seat, but it's difficult.
So you've started up your workshops again now then, haven't you?
Oh, yes, absolutely. But a year and a half of not doing what I consider being my oxygen.
Yeah.
And really what feeds my soul is to teach, to share, in the field. And so I've done a lot of other things. I've done a lot of online like everybody else. I'm so done with online. And writing more books. So I was very busy, but it really did not feed my soul like being on the streets of the world with 10 photographers.
Well, I do want to come back to your teaching and your mentoring, but there's this delicious low-key feel in your work where you seem to search in the shadows for a break in the dark. And I'm probably talking about, in particular, the shadow work. But I do see that. I know that's not your entire portfolio of work, but it does seem to be where you love to play.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I really believe that there is no bad light. There is, I always tell my students, there is no bad light. There are only bad photographers. So you really have to make the light work for you. So if it's harsh light, well, great. For a documentary photographer, it's more exciting because you're going to work with deep shadows and blown out highlights, and it's more challenging. But then you get more dramatic photographs, and it's all fun. If it was overcast every day, it's easier. Or if it was sunset or sunrise, golden hour every time of the day, yes, it's easier. But it would get really boring quickly. So I find I love rain on the streets. I love deep fog. I really do think that you need to do those visual push-ups every day. It's just like an athlete has to practice every day, or a juggler has to practice every day. It's the same thing. You can't grow in the craft by looking at other people's work. It's going to be nice for inspiration, but that's not going to make you a better photographer. So it's really by being out there.
I love that phrase, visual push-ups.
And that I did not come up with that. I heard it a long time ago. I have no idea who said
claim
it.
Claim it.
So great. So I wish I could claim it.
Your pictures demonstrate a mind that's seemingly always creative, and really you've just reinforced that a moment ago with what you've said. And we've been talking much about using the camera as a sketchbook of late. Your work, well, some photographers have a kind of I suppose an A to Z of celebrities or whatever. Your work is an A to Z of life. Well,
yes.
What is it about people, and often their eccentricities, because I see that in your work, that fascinates you and draws you to them?
Well, I love people. I'm definitely I'm an extrovert. Not every street photographer is an extrovert, however. A lot of street photographers are introverted. I'm an extrovert. I love people. I see beauty in everyday life. I mean, I'm already seeing as if I was taking a picture. Like I'm driving and I'm stuck in traffic, and I will frame the car, however ugly or mundane that car could be just in front of me. I will frame it to make it interesting in my mind. Like, how would I frame this to make it look fantastic, although it's an ugly, rusty car? So I'm always taking pictures, and it can be very distracting. You sure don't want me driving through Paris because I see moments every corner, and I hate it when I have to actually drive myself through Paris because it's too distracting. So I prefer to be the passenger then, and then my window's open and I see moments.
My God, I mean, you photograph and run these workshops in Paris and Rome. They're probably two of the worst cities to ever take your eyes off the road as you drive.
Exactly. Yeah, you don't want to be next to me if I'm driving.
Yeah, if Valerie's
in an interesting city.
I'll get in the car with the other person. I'm not going with Valerie. Not today. But you raise an interesting point, actually, about introversion and being extroverted and introverted. Mm-hmm. You're an extrovert.
Yes.
But there are plenty of photographers, as you've correctly identified, that are introverts. Can you be a street photographer as an introvert?
Absolutely. I think it's like going mountain climbing if you're afraid of heights. You kind of, push yourself. But then that said, you don't have to be in people's faces either. And that's just not my way of photographing, as you may have seen. I can be within inches of people without them knowing I'm there because I know how to remain invisible. Yeah. But I'm not the photographer who will be in people's face and try to get a reaction and then just walk away. That is just not me. I hate that. I wouldn't want to be the receiving end of that anyways, if I was the person on the street. So even introverted people, well, they don't have to be so close people. They can definitely be more minimalist. There's so many ways to document life on the street. You can do street portraits, and that's actually a really good way for introverts to get started, is actually have an interaction with a subject. But they can also do more minimalist type of street photography where the cityscape or the landscape is the primary subject and then the human element walks through. And so there's so many ways to approach it. So whether people are really even shy, it's a good way to get started. But approaching strangers is also a good way. For me, it's too easy to approach strangers. So usually I talk with strangers all the time. And I actually forgot that I wanted to take a picture. What originally drew me, because I'll go blah, blah, into conversation and then just, then we say goodbye. But a lot of time I'll just talk with people and then I'll say, hey, you look really good, or the light is really good. Can I do a story, and then I'll take a series of photographs if they're doing something like recently I was photographing skimboarders on the beach. So I did a visual narrative of what they were doing, but it's not doing a portrait where you would pose people or anything. I just let people do whatever they're doing. For me, that's kind of easy. So I usually only photograph candid moments. That's really my preferred way of shooting. Street portraits are a good way, however, for people who are introverted, good way to get over that fear.
Yeah, you see, one of our good friends of the show, John Manell, who works in London, the portrait per day man, that's exactly what he did. I had to do to take himself out of some mental health issues that he's talked about on this show, and he's been very successful in photographing people. And I must actually go and spend some time because I want to watch his approach. But what is the approach? You said that you communicate well with people. Is there a secret to it? Is there kind of a patter that opens up that communication channel when you're doing street portraiture?
No, you just have to feel good about what you're doing. I mean, if you're so nervous, you're going to really send the wrong vibe. So feel good about what you're doing. That will totally transfer onto the subject anyways. Yeah. So just make small talk. I mean, really, ideally, if somebody is super shy, start making conversation without the camera, comment on the flavor of the day at the coffee shop or something. Then, do that 5 times a day. And then after you do that 5 times a day for a week or two, then, pull out the camera and said, hey, cool glasses. Do you mind if I do a portrait? Because there's a big step between, commenting on the flavor of the coffee in line at the coffee shop and taking a camera and asking a stranger if you can make a portrait of them. So baby steps. Yeah. And for me, the first one is so easy, and then I get carried away. And that's usually when I forget to actually have the camera with me because I'm just having a lovely conversation.
But it's such an interesting thing as well that many people talk about this being a really good thing for mindfulness. Mm-hmm. Street in particular is good for that. Yeah. And again, we've spoken before with photographers on this show that have used street work in particular to deal with mindful or to engage with mindfulness.
Absolutely. I mean, there is nothing else that you can be more in the moment than opening your heart to the beauty of everyday life wherever you are. And it doesn't have to be on the street. I spent most of the pandemic either on the beach or on frozen lakes. Actually, I spent all of winter here in Minnesota photographing life on frozen lakes. And I met amazing people. So it's all about documenting everyday life, wherever that life may be. Yeah. So street photography, that's why I don't like to use that term, because it implies streets where it doesn't have to be.
What do you call it then? What is street photography?
It's really documentary photography. Yeah. I think it would be the most correct term, because the way I approach it is very similar to photojournalism. I mean, it's totally untouched, unstaged, and unaltered. So I won't remove anything from my pictures. What is there is is on the final photograph. I barely even do a slight cropping. So I'm very much of a purist. That said, a lot of street photographers will clean up things, or clone things out. I don't. I find that I get the most satisfaction if I get the shot straight out of camera, as if I was shooting film. I make the decision if it's going to be color or black and white before I press the shutter. So I'm definitely in that frame of mind where all those decisions, no matter what, even if you shoot raw and you make the decision after, it's actually something you should know before you press the shutter. Is color the story here, or is color distracting from the subject? So that's a creative decision you should make before you press the shutter, no matter whether you have the choice afterwards or not. So that's very important, because you don't learn anything in post-processing. You're not going to become a better photographer by spending hours in post-processing. My post-processing is 5 seconds or less. If the picture takes more than 5 seconds, it goes in the bin. So yes, because there is nothing you can do to those photographs to make. You're not going to make a bad picture into a good one. Somebody said once, you can't polish a turd, but you can roll it in glitter. And that's exactly what post-processing does,
Setups. Some of your, humor does play a part in many of your photographs, actually. I love the one with a hand going up where there's another huge hand above it. And that's a great example of one of yours. Do you set stuff up? Do you ask people to?
Never.
No?
And I always have witnesses because I'm usually, teaching.
But is it a bad thing? Is it a bad thing? Because some of the most famous photographs, Cartier-Bresson has several photographs that were entirely set up that people believe are decisive moments.
Isn't that disappointing, though, when you find out? And there are a lot of them, like Robert Doisneau shot a lot for magazines, and like the kids at the Hôtel de Ville is completely set up. They're actors. But a lot of people don't know that. And I think when you find out, it's like, oh, it is? Well, it takes the merit out of the equation, no matter what. It's a beautiful picture, but it's not a moment of everyday life that's never happened before, that will never happen again, that was a fraction of a second.
Yeah.
Because if you say to someone, oh, could you kiss again? I just missed the shot. Well, what's the point? Then you're staging. So that is not documentary photography anymore. It is it is setting up a shot. So it's totally okay if you don't call it that. If a photographer always photographs their girlfriends walking down the street in beautiful light, well, it's not a stranger. It is set up at that point. There's nothing wrong with it as long as they're honest about it.
Yeah. Let's talk about personal work, because it is something you mentor about. And actually, if you look at your website, it's a reasonably comprehensive a website when it comes to lots of different things. And in fact, it's something I want to talk to you about anyway. But how much of your work is saleable within that site that I look at, and how much of it is personal projects? And how important is it for it to be a personal project?
Everything is personal project. I haven't worked for a client in 10 years, and I've turned down every client job for the past 10 years. I just want to shoot for me. I don't want to have to please anyone. And I think most documentary photographers shoot for themselves. Very rarely do they get commission. That said, my work has been picked up by ad agencies for ad campaigns, even for some really big brands, international campaigns, because they like the street feel, and then the subject wasn't recognizable, so they could use it because it was shadow or silhouette. But all my work is personal project.
And I know we're not keen about calling it necessarily street photography, but I'm going to use that expression for a little bit longer. One thing we've been talking about of late is this misconception of street photography, that somehow you need to, and we've kind of touched on it, I know, you need to be a kind of a ninja to get your unobtrusive shots. But I think it's more about, personally, I think it's more about a dance with those that you photograph.
Absolutely.
But how do you remain unobtrusive while getting what are actually some pretty personal shots that you've made? Yes,
the kiss on the beach, the lovers. I'm within a few centimeters from them, and because I didn't even stop walking. I know my focal length. I work consistently with a 23 millimeter, so I'm really close to people. That's 23 on a APS-C sensor.
So that's a 35 yeah.
equivalent, which is the ideal street photography, all-around street photography lens. So I know where I need to be to get the shot I envision.
Yeah.
I without having to crop, because that's the way I see. So, I could shoot from the hip, completely blind, walk by, shoot from the hip, and keep on. I barely slow down to make the shot. So that's how you get those shots really up close and personal. And with a camera that doesn't make a sound, that's easier. I used to shoot with a DSLR and I still got close to people. But now that we have cameras that are less obtrusive and completely silent, it definitely makes your life easier.
Wonderful. And more from Valerie next week. Oh, I found some woodland. I wonder how I can get in. Hang on, let me go around the other side. See, my woodland explorative, inquisitive nature has been fired up by Simon Baxter, our guest from last week, although I am being cautious where I'm walking at the moment. Do you remember last year on, let me remind you, I can't remember which episode it was, but do you remember I was walking, I was doing a similar walk alongside the canal, which I'm doing today. I don't think I told you. I'm by the canal. Oh, are you, Neil? That's not far from your house, is it? No, it's not. I'm doing that saving petrol thing. So last year I came here and I got stopped by a guy with a gun. Do you remember? Now, we're not so used to that. Not in this country, anyway. And he said, "What are you doing around here?" I said, "Well, I'm doing a photo walk." And I explained to him about this whole episode. And he said, "Oh, I thought you were a hunt saboteur." And he wasn't going to shoot me. He was just, he was out seeing to fox, I think, or something like that. And he just, and he didn't think it was a good idea that perhaps I got in the way of his bullets. And when he showed me them, I thought, yeah, you've got a point there. And I toddled off in the other direction. Right, mails. A couple of quick fire ones. First up, if turtles, bison and a field of spider webs feature in your regular Friday walk, you are living in a wonderfully exotic land. You truly are. This is from Joe Harding. Hi, Neil. Still listening and being inspired by the show. Wanted to let you know that your work and efforts are appreciated. Well, that's very kind. Thank you very much. The Ryan Visions. Oh, it's got a bit windy around here. Can you hear me? Whoosh, across the microphone. We started out all sunny, and now it's getting a bit chilly, and the wind's come across, and there's some more clouds. 4 seasons in one day. Bring on the hail. We're good at that. Anyway, the Ryan Visions episode was fantastic, says Joe. I'm assuming you mean his van life one, because we've spoken to Ryan a few times, haven't we? I usually listen to the Photowalk episodes while driving to my own photo walks, attached to a few shots from a recent Missouri one, including where I visited a field which is apparently where spider webs actually grow. Well, sort of. A couple of these were taken with my new-to-me 70-200 Nikon lens, by the way, from mpb.com. I did not make that up. That's in this letter. Look, it's here. Thanks, Joe. The pictures and also a link to Joe's Flickr is on the show page today. That field of spider webs, that's quite extraordinary. Our friend Steve, when he was travelling with his now wife, then girlfriend, across Australia, Steve was, I don't know, playing frisbee or something in, where was it? Bicentennial Park, which is, of course, one of the main parks in Sydney. And at certain times of the year, apparently, you get these huge, giant... Now, are they called gold? Now, I'm going to get this wrong from memory, aren't I? Golden orb spider... just big orb spider. Which, orbs can be modest size, small size, right up to huge size, can't they? And they apparently spin these incredibly large, wonderful webs. Steve wasn't really looking, and he was running to gather the frisbee that was thrown by his then girlfriend, and he ran straight into one of these webs. It was like a scene from Indiana Jones. And apparently Steve says I came screaming out the other side, convinced I was going to be eaten alive. I mean, they are huge, aren't they? I did look them up online just to check my facts on that, and I can't remember the name of the orb spider now. I should have written it down, didn't I? But they are large. You could fit some of them into a frisbee, and its sort of legs would dangle over the sides, wouldn't they? Some so large they'd need a modest-sized camera bag if you wanted to carry them around, which is proper happenstance link into this mail. Happenstance sometimes happens with pictures, but today it's happening with a letter from Jason Lawley in Australia land. See, I don't just throw this together. I take a while, look through the mails that we've got and try and piece it together, craft it together. Hi Neil, really enjoying the show, been a listener since Christmas and also now a follower too of the Fujicast. Thank you, that's double support, isn't it? I know you'll love this story, especially given your newfound love of Australia. I'm not so sure, is it newfound? It's certainly 3 years old now, isn't it? Ever since we went, I just talk about it all the time. Normally to my reprobate mate Mullins, who's got absolutely sick to death of me talking about Australia. I do it on purpose now. It's a classic redback in a camera bag story, and dates back over a decade now to when I lived in Adelaide. Weekends would always be my photography time, since weekdays were spent office-based, a series of dull jobs that involved servicing aircon units. I don't know, it depends if aircon units are your life, doesn't it? They clearly weren't yours, were they? Come Fridays, we'd pack the ute. See, we're speaking Australian now, aren't we? And be out on the road to explore Adelaide Hills and further into the bush with a tent and a camera and a macro lens. So, yes please to whoever it was who wrote in asking for a guest from Macro Land, says Jason. Redbacks are known for finding warm, dry places to hide, and the rule when camping for us is to zip everything and anything to keep creatures like that out. We were heading out into the bush on the Saturday morning, stopped to take some pictures. I went to reach into my camera bag and something stopped me. The camera bag was half unzipped from the day before, and I remembered from my training, although you don't say what that training was, Jason. Was that your aircon unit training? I don't know, do those sort of things hang out in air conditioning units that you have to service? I wouldn't have thought so. It's probably not very warm, is it, for them? But perhaps it's that. And I remembered from my training just to check my bag before simply shifting around inside it. Good job I did, because between the rolls of film, I spied the legs, then familiar red spot of the redback spider. Usually, first thing I do is grab camera, film, load up for the first shots of a new day. Had I done that, I'm sure I would have been bitten by this thing. Keep up the good work from Jason. Oh, I'm shivering now, Jason. The thought. I did, after your mail, go and look up just how dangerous redbacks are. And of course, then I went down a rabbit hole of YouTube. Lots of videos of people letting them wander around on their forearms with no care, it seems. But every year, was it 10,000 or 20,000? That's quite a difference, Neil. Get the numbers right. Let's call it 15,000. People get bitten by these things. But the anti-venom program in Australia is so good that I think I'm right in saying that they don't get any fatalities, or hardly any. There was that story, wasn't there, about the builder that got bitten in an area that's a bit more private than we usually talk about on this show. He was sat on the you'd call it a dunny, wouldn't you? Shall I use the Australianism here? On the toilet, and this thing bit him, and yes, he got taken to hospital, and of course all the mates on the building site thought that was hilarious. But then he went back for a second time, same site, sat on the loo with the I don't know what the newspaper is there a Morning Herald, and I don't know if it's the same one, it can't have been, but a spider returned and bit him in exactly the same place. I think he's using an alternative dunny now. But thank you, Jason, for your mail. And the first thing I'd do after reading that, if I lived in a country where I had stuff like that, is go vacuum my camera bags, especially the collection that I keep in the shed. But in that the most dangerous animals we have in this country are politicians, scratch that. I think even a redback would probably run from a politician, surely. Oh. That's too much for me. Walk on. But yeah, thank you for that for that warning shot. Check your bags if you live in particular countries. All mails are important, but I have one in a moment that stopped me quite literally in my tracks, and it came from somebody who isn't even a photographer at all. I don't know why I said it like that. Who just isn't a photographer. That's better. It's a subject that's been a topic for nearly a month now, but before we hear from Carl, the letter writer, here's a little of Ryan Visions, as Joe Harding mentioned him a moment ago, with some words about the wonder of the open road, being very slightly planned, but equally letting the wind take you in all directions that you're not necessarily planning, so you can make the most amazing photo stories. Ryan Visions.
The interstates are the artery of the country. It gets you from point A to point B as quickly as possible. But the back roads, the country roads, the small communities, those are the nerve endings of this country, and that's what connect people. And I've learned that if you go down back roads and country roads, you'll find things that are amazing and beautiful that don't get recognized on tourist brochures. You meet locals who know local places that are amazing places to photograph that you won't hear about on, top 10 visit this place blogs. And a lot of it is just kind of going by the seat of my pants. When I first got on the road, I had this idea that I was going to photograph a month in this state, and then I was going to move a month to that state. And then I found out the hard way that A, a month is not enough time to photograph any state if I'm stressing myself out. And B, it takes all the fun out of the journey if I'm just consistently on a schedule. And so I really leave myself open with a loose idea of what I have to do, but I don't pick destination, because a lot of what I'm doing, there is no final destination. There is a lot of searching without knowing what you're looking for. And so that takes away the time of being on the computer or editing photos, but at the same time, it opens up a world of discovery and opportunity that could be missed otherwise.
Ryan Visions. I know. I romanticize a lot about photographic van life, don't I? And it's not always necessarily an easy road, quite literally. But Ryan does make it sound like an amazing adventure, doesn't he? I have this dream which I'll share with you one day, which involves a VW camper van. Oi, I heard that. Sorry, Carl. Anyway, you're not supposed to be on this week's show. I've walked to my destination this week. No car this week. We're saving fuel because we have a rush on fuel. You may have seen it in the news around the world. I don't know, maybe not. But somebody leaked a memo, didn't they? I think this is the generally accepted version of events, that somebody leaked an email from a big petrol company which essentially said that they were closing a few forecourts because they have driver shortages. That's another story, but move on, Neil. And next thing we know, literally within, 3 days, the whole country had run out of fuel at the pumps. In Scotland, they're very sensible. They didn't do it. I think in parts of Wales, they've been bright. They didn't do it. But us lot in England, everybody zipped out. Quick, get fuel. We're running out. No, we're not running out. It was just a few tanker drivers that couldn't deliver to certain sites. And that is human nature. As you can hear, I'm slightly exasperated about it. I'm trying not to be. Quick, bird, sing to me. See, I'm feeling better already. I know. Humans, I know. So no car this week. But this idea of being on the road, doing a daily walk, meeting up with photographers along the way, a bit of a pipe dream, sort of pipe dream heaven at the moment. And does rather rest on this becoming more full-time with our Patreon support, or being able to manage more than 2 numbers in the lotto. One of the two. Of which it's a reasonably good time to say thank you to our patrons, who for the price of a cup of coffee per month, or from a cup of coffee, because some people choose to help us and assist us a little more than that, but that's essentially what it is. A really nice one from a high street shop. You know, the one where you say, yeah, I'll have the extra toffee in the top, please. Yeah, go on, stick the marshmallows in. Why not? Yeah, put it in the special cup. One of those sort of cups of coffee. But from the price of one of those, you help support the show. And I'm really, really appreciative of the fact that you do, because we're trying to grow this community and this title. What started out as a hobby is growing more into something that takes up an awful lot of time during the week, which I'm very pleased to do. But all my grand plans are being helped along by the wonderful, fantastic patrons. You know who you are. I see your names, and a big broad smile comes across my face. And of course, you get the opportunity to share your websites and your Instagram addresses, etc., when we do Patron of the Week slots. And I have also got a thought, actually, as we get closer to Christmas. Remind me of this. I will do, Neil. That I wanted to do a special patron show, not one that's just for patrons, but one that features some conversations, as many as I can get in, so almost like a phone-in hour with our patrons to talk about their work and what they do, because I think it would be very inspirational to hear from them, because many of our patrons, all of our patrons, are fantastically talented and have so much to share. So there's that. There's the Facebook group. Thank you to those that are in the Facebook group that are posting some amazing pictures of what you see on your photo walks. And of course, if you'd like to send in your pictures, then that's what drives this show on a Friday, the Friday Photo Walk. Send them to the email address, which is studio@photographydaily.show. Studio@photographydaily.show. So you can share your pictures and your thoughts and your stories. And that is exactly what Carl did. I've held back your surname, Carl, for personal reasons, of course. And I'm imagining that it took a reasonable amount of courage to write this. And just a little context. I recorded a special Wednesday edition with the co-founder of a photographic charity called Remember My Baby, whose remit is to photograph babies free of charge for parents who lose their baby prior to birth or during or after. And it was an episode that drew a lot of support and messages, many of which I couldn't really read for privacy reasons. But this one arrived from Carl, and he gave us permission to read it out in case it should possibly help somebody else. So I will read it in full. Hi, Neil. Firstly, I'm not a photographer. Back in the early noughties, when I was in my early 20s, I dabbled with a film SLR and learned the basics, but never really got in the habit of taking my camera everywhere with me. And so my entry-level Nikon F something or other has just gathered dust for a couple of decades. Fast forward to now, and my wife and I are lucky enough to live in the Marches area, literally right on the border where Powys, Herefordshire and Shropshire meet. We only moved here in October for my work in dairy farming. It's a beautiful part of the country and somewhere I've never really visited before. It got me thinking that I should really record our time spent in a beautiful place like this. We're also lucky enough to have 2 young boys. One is 4, and our youngest is only 6 weeks old. I suddenly feel like I have something worth documenting, and I'd like to have decent photographs of my boys as they grow up. Last year, though, we didn't feel so lucky. In July 2020, my wife was 20 weeks pregnant with what then would have been our second child. She had already experienced 3 heartbreaking miscarriages, but none had progressed this far, and chances were from this stage everything would be fine. We felt brave enough to even name him, and we chose Lars. I was waiting in the car while my wife went in for her 20-week scan, all alone due to COVID restrictions, and she called me, and I thought something must be wrong, and sadly I was right. She was sobbing down the phone to me, telling me that I was allowed to come and be with her. It turned out that Lars had a congenital heart defect and wouldn't survive once born. Somehow we couldn't face going full term and then watching him die, so we decided to terminate the pregnancy, and that still haunts us today. 2 days later, we went in for my wife to be induced. The team of midwives were amazing and considerate. Lars was born at peace, and we spent 24 hours with him, trying to make memories to remember him by. The midwife had a half-decent camera and took a handful of reasonable black and white shots to go along with our iPhone snaps, but the results are not too great. And we hadn't heard of Remember My Baby until I listened to your episode with Nikki Heppenstall. It was the first episode I've listened to of Photography Daily, and it absolutely floored me. What an amazing service to provide. And it's exactly what we wish we could have had. I was delighted to hear, though, that RMB also offer an editing service, and I've since been in touch to arrange some touching up of our photos. I'm particularly hopeful for one shot, which is our favourite, as currently it shows blood on Lars' face. We couldn't clean him, as his skin was just too delicate. To paraphrase something I read elsewhere, my wife and I grieve not for someone we've lost, but for someone we'll never have. That handful of precious photos are all that we have to show that Lars was ever here. After Lars, my wife was so determined to give our son a sibling that she wanted to try again. I wasn't so sure. I couldn't face seeing her so anguished again, but my wife had made up her mind, and I'm so glad we did, as 6 weeks ago, we welcomed the latest addition to our family into the world. I've bought a camera, a Sony A7 II, and I hope at some point to bring my skills along enough to register with RMB and be able to help a family in their time of need. Your podcast was the impetus that I needed to get on with it and make it happen. So thank you for that. All the best from Carl. Well, Carl, thank you for that. And I'm so pleased you wrote in. And I'm pleased that you're now, as you said further on in your letter, that we haven't read, a more regular Photowalk listener. And I'm hoping that you'll learn that that's Sony back to front and, of course, inside out. And if it seems right, and if you can do it, then yes, I'm hoping that you'll join the Remember My Baby team for the just incredible work that they do in this country. And I know that there are other charities like it in other countries, certainly in America, and one in Holland as well that we mention on that show. But most of all, I'm pleased that you have, I'm delighted actually that you have your new adventure, which doesn't replace, of course, the story that came before, but it does give you a chance to document this special new one and your family. And thank you, sincerely, thank you for that letter and your feedback to that particular episode, which of course I'll link to in today's show notes. I'm always flattered by that you share, for the pictures, for the life stories, for the honesty, and for fear that this sounds like a clumsy moment of commercialism when it truly isn't supposed to be. For the moments like that where you make this a really very different kind of photography program. I heard from a broadcaster friend the other day who still quite can't understand how I went from speaking on the radio to photographing people saying I do at weddings. But she mentioned that she'd heard the Photowalk recently and felt I'd found a happy place, which is in no small part really down to you and your letters, because it really is a community where, to be fair, you don't even have to be a photographer, like Carl just a moment ago, who I assume maybe saw the episode mentioned somewhere on a platform. I think, well, I know that RMB had shared it a bit, so I'm assuming that's where he picked that up. But just like making pictures, whether that's once a week for Insta or once a year for the family album or every day, such as our guest coming up in chapter 2 in a moment, that's what this show's all about: sharing our stories, sharing our pictures. And well, that word "flawed" is a word that Carl used in his email, and it's a word I often use myself as well, and that's exactly how I felt. So on the Remember My Baby front, by the way, I heard from Nikki Heppenstall, my guest on that special, and the co-founder of RMB, and she said we've just had our 4,700th session logged today, and this would have been about a week and a bit ago. Nikki said we should hit 5,000 late December. It is, of course, a number that you don't hope that they hit, don't you, for all the right reasons, but the fact that they're helping so many parents now in their hours of need is testament really to the importance that this charity exists, isn't it? So shall we play chapter 2 of our chat this week? I'm talking with a photographer who is many thousands of miles from our last guest. This is Keith Moss, based in God's country, as they call it on visitor maps, Yorkshire. Yes, beautiful Yorkshire. 35 years he's been a photographer, a mentor, a street photographer, and this fits perfectly considering we've been talking film again. He also has a complete love affair with film since he's more in my sort of neck of the woods, so to speak. I'm hoping that he'll accept a live Photowalk show at some stage in the future. You did agree to that, didn't you, Keith? No? Oh, go on. All right, Neil. Fantastic. I do need to give a glancing reference to a character that he mentions within his conversation with me called Yozza Hughes. Yozza Hughes is known for, well, first of all, the programme. I should tell you the programme. It was a sitcom, television sitcom, in the 80s during the what is broadly known in this country, anyway, in the UK, as the Thatcherite period. So job hunting and job losses, and anyway, we don't want to get political. No, Neil, steer clear of the politics. I will. But yes, Yozza Hughes was a character played by, and I did have to note this down, where is it? Bernard Hill, that's right, in a programme called Boys from the Black Stuff. And Yozza was this character who had this catchphrase, which was, giz a job, give us a job. And essentially, he, from memory, didn't he ask everybody that question, whoever he saw, giz a job. Got a job, giz a job. That was Yozza Hughes. And if you hear him mentioned, you'll hear him mentioned, that's the context for you, just so that you know who Keith is talking about. So here's our second guest this week. This is Keith Moss. There's 4 words I really like to see tightly neighboured together. Self-taught professional photographer. Which was, Keith, by, well, no mean feat in the 80s, really, was it? Prior to learning from YouTube and online mentoring courses. What was the route in the mid-80s then?
So my story is quite interesting, I guess. I was a butcher originally, and I had an accident at work, and sort of sat down in a freezer with some meat in my hands, and consequently hurt my back quite severely.
Right.
And then from there, I contracted a disease called ankylosing spondylitis, which took quite a few years to diagnose. Basically, it's a cross between an arthritic disease and then your autoimmune defense system permanently attacks your body. So I just decided to pick up a camera. And I said to my wife, Pat, I'm going to be a professional photographer. And she just smiled and looked at me and thought, well, whatever floats his boat, let him get on with it. And a few years, I suppose I were a bit like Yozza Hughes, Boys from the Black Stuff.
Yeah.
I would go to a factory and say, look at these flowers I've shot. And I could do that for your widgets. And stupidly, some of them took me on.
What an amazing story that you just literally showed up at the door and said, I can do this for you. Which just goes to show, actually, that sometimes the youthful, naive approach, actually, and I use naive with a small n, is probably quite a good way to go about it, isn't it? Yeah,
I mean, I think people like confident people, and I was just very enthusiastic, and I suppose enthusiasm, confidence, the smile, and people sort of warmed to it and just gave me an opportunity. And it went from there, really.
Well, 35 years of experience in different parts of the world for blue chips like Hilton Hotels, Unilever, the BBC, a list of celebs when it comes to that side of your work. It's street that you now spend your time photographing, and of course mentoring too, which is the navigation I want to take today, Keith, along with your deep love of film and teaching it. But let's start with street. How long have you been photographing life outside the studio, as it were?
All my life, really. It started as a child. My mother and dad went to Africa when I was 13 to earn a living over there. My dad was an engineer, and he worked for Caterpillar. So he went out to Lagos in Nigeria for 12 months. And I went out for 3 months. And in that 3 months, I sort of took my father's camera, a Pentax ME Super, his pride and joy, and went into the bush and photographed just what was there. It's always been about people for me.
Yeah.
So I photographed a lot of people on the streets. The education system wouldn't let me go out there for the full 12 months. And they let me go out for 3 months with the view of when I came back doing a presentation of what was out there and so on and so forth. And that's why I took the images originally.
So did you have any sort of grounding or knowledge of style or composition or the way that you wanted to make your pictures?
I've never thought about composition. I've never thought about anything. It just, everything fell. It were all there, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I still look back at some of those images now, and they're great, really, and they're very good documentary images. And I suppose that's when my interest started. And then from there, I rebelled against my father and decided to be a butcher. And consequently, then after the accident, picked the camera back up. So from 13 to about 20 odd, I didn't take a photograph. So yeah, it's always been about people for me. It's called street photography, but my true engagement is with people.
So I'm keen to find out the way that you work, Keith. The way when you're on the street, you photograph, your approach to it.
There's two things I do. One is grab shots, which is I would call pure street photography. It's just seeing an opportunity on the street, seeing something happening and taking a shot actually on the street. But for me, my passion is seeing somebody and then stopping them and photographing them and learning about their life.
Which for me, I think is one of the most interesting sides of photographing on the street, the street portraiture. But many photographers who would like to do it, of course, that's a confidence issue. How do you go about it? How do you navigate it after your 35 years photographing commercially and on the street?
I'm very good at reading body language. And I guess the reason for that is the fact that I was left home alone when I was 13, when my mother and dad went to Africa. I was left in the care of an old auntie. She was 86. But essentially, I was living on my own in my mother and dad's house. And I think a lot of my skill comes from that era. So what I do is when I walk the streets, I see somebody that I want to photograph, and then I may raise my eyebrows and walking past them, or I get their attention.
Confidence in approaching strangers, though, is a constant conversation we have on the show. And those who work as street photographers or are, quote, giving it a go, and some of those, of course, will be photographers who, with great pedigree, have never tried it before. But it is about how you act, isn't it? It's not about how you hide. And I know for a while it was about, well, just, keep a low profile. Nobody should know that you're making a picture. But it's interesting, the street photographers that I see with the best work, I'm absolutely sure that their subjects know exactly what's going on.
Yeah, my subjects know what's going on because I speak with them, I talk to them, I communicate with them. When you're reading body language, it transcends verbal language. So a lot of my stuff is abroad, is places like Istanbul. I don't speak Turkish, I don't speak German, I don't speak Romanian where I go, I don't speak Spanish. But yeah, I still connect with all these people and get really interesting images of who they really are as a person, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I teach that psychological side as well of how to stop somebody, how to connect with them instantly, how to make them feel comfortable, and then how to work with them to get the best out of them.
Well, given that so many photographers talk about themselves as introverts, it's interesting that many choose street work as a way to cope with that. In many respects, that requires the extrovert switch. And in regard to what you've photographed and the experiences that you've had, there must be some that come to mind where you think, now, that is what makes this worth doing. Those moments where you've met individuals, you've spoken with them, that you've communicated, and that's what fuels your interest in street.
You meet all sorts of people. There was this Hells Angel in Edinburgh, and he was a massive guy, really big both ways, very strong guy, very, very tall. And I went up to him and he was preaching, and I went up to him and I said, how are you doing? I said, are you a real skinhead then or what? And, I just got talking to him. And I said, do you mind if I take your photo? And he said, why? And I said, because you've got a really interesting face. He said, what do you mean by that? And I said, it's just really interesting. I said, I love your face. I said, it's really expressive and I really love it. And he looked at his wife was there with him. And I knew she would say, I told you so, because that's what we do as human beings. We all think about ourselves as not being attractive or whatever. And then as wives say, of course you are, love, of course you are. I told you that you are. Yeah. And he sort of looked at me and went, yeah, okay. And he looked really proud because I'd complimented him and it really sunk in, and his wife had agreed. Went back home, processed the film and sent him it. And he sent me a lovely letter saying that he cried when he saw the image. He'd never had an image of himself that he liked ever, and he said it were absolutely a beautiful image.
Well, it seems to stem all the way from what you were talking about. It comes from communicating with somebody, showing interest.
Do you know what? As human beings, that's what we're meant to do. We're meant to communicate with each other. That's what gives us our spirit, if you know what I mean.
Well, I want to talk about your work with film because pretty much everything you produce now is through the medium of film. Not everything, but much. And I know you've taken your 35 years of experience and invested it into teaching others the, well, you used the word spirit, so I will as well, the spirit of the darkroom. Do you get as much joy seeing others produce prints as you did the first time you started pulling prints from a tray?
I do.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what drives me really, is giving people that enjoyment that I've always had, whether that be actually taking a photograph and seeing the results, or whether that be meeting people and photographing people, or whether that be a landscape, or or in the darkroom. It's all rewarding to me.
Yeah, you have a fantastic mobile darkroom as well, don't you?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. I called it Dapper Dan, which, looking back, I wish I'd never done it, because people, when I'm driving, people will look at Dapper Dan and they don't see the fact that it says Dapper Dan, the darkroom van.
Yeah.
They just see Dapper Dan, and then they look at me and they think, no, that's not right. You know what I mean?
So describe the working space for me, because you're the second photographer I've talked with now who has a mobile darkroom like this. There's Jack Lowe's 90s ambulance. What's yours? Because actually these vans can have all the space you need. It's probably the perfect size.
Yeah, it is. It's an old Nissan Interstar, so I guess it's like a high-topped Renault or a high-topped Transit.
So you can stand up in it, which is important.
Oh, yeah, you can stand up in it. So I started by stripping it and insulating it. But on top of insulating it, I put a moisture barrier in, which is like bubble wrap, but it's like tin foil. And then I didn't carpet it, but I had it carpeted all the way round, so all the walls and the ceiling, everything carpeted. I had the 240-volt electric put in because I have a generator, and I also had 12-volt put in so that I can work whether I'm anywhere, if that makes sense. I can work anywhere. One of my places I love to go is Scotland, so if I'm up in Scotland, I can work and sleep and camp wherever I want to be.
Why do you think the film's found its feet again? What is it the photographers are coming back to, do you think? Because, and when I say coming back to, actually there's a whole breed of photographers that were never there in the first place, but they're visiting it now.
I think it's because you immerse yourself in it a lot more and connect with it a lot more. Digital for me, and it is for me, is quite a soulless operation. And a lot of the times when you're using digital cameras, you overuse them, if you know what I mean. You'll just keep clicking, click, 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 and look at them, click, 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 or whatever. And then it's that terrible nightmare, for me anyway, of going back and sifting through hundreds of images when you only needed 10. Whereas with film, it's a lot more immersive because you think in a different way. I actually see the image before I've taken it. And then I go through the process. It happens in milliseconds now, but when I started teaching it, I had to break it all down, all the process I go through in my head. So I see the finished image, and then I decide how I'm going to print it. But before I decide how I'm going to print it, I've got to decide how I'm going to process it. And before I decide how I'm going to process it, I've got to decide how I'm going to expose it. And what chemistry to use in all those things. So it's that immersive process, I think, that is really, really important, because you see that finished image in your head, and then you use your skills with chemistry and photographic paper, whatever you want to call it, to get that image. So it's a lot more immersive, and you invest a lot more in it. You invest an awful lot more in it. And people say, it's really, I'm scared of shooting film. It's no different than digital, really. It's just you expose for shadow detail in black and white in film, and you expose for highlight detail in digital. That's the only difference, really.
Just finally, Keith, there's a picture that you posted back in June on Twitter. It was a moment in Scotland, huge stag foreground looking away, but essentially into the picture all at the same time. But there's this sort of really deep, low, oppressive clouds just sort of hugging the hills and the mountains behind it. A tiny house. I don't know how much space that house takes up in the frame. Probably no more than 2 or 3%, if that. There's the only sort of illuminated thing in there, really. But so I'm reading all this from your picture, and I'm sort of imagining how you felt at the time. But I'm wondering what you do feel at those moments as a photographer. What photography in that moment brings to you?
It was shot on a 5.4 camera. It was actually shot on an Intrepid camera. Would you believe? So what happened was I saw this stag, magnificent stag, and pulled into the bottom half of a lay-by. It were like in two tiers. There were a bottom half and then there were a top half. And in between the two, I saw this stag on the right-hand side. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. And then I thought, I've got to get above it. To get the shot I want, I've got to get above it. So I thought, well, what do I do? Do I walk up there? Do I drive up there? How do I do it? Because it were really raining, chucking it down and misty. And I thought, right, I'm going to drive up there. And I drove up there and I thought it's going to be used to people driving up there because it sat there. So I drove up there and got within about, 15, 20 feet of it. I was very, very close. Got over the back, didn't go outside, but got over the back into the back of the van, set my 5.4 camera up and thought, please be there when I open the van door. And then I gradually opened the van door and it were there. And it was just breathing. And I started to breathe in the same way the stag was breathing, to let it know that I'm not a threat, to let us both sink in together. And it's a wonderful thing to do with animals. And so I started breathing the same way, and it looked back at me, and I was just breathing and had that same feeling as it, and just calm and so on and so forth. And then it looked away, and you could tell it were okay, I weren't a threat. So then I got my camera in position, and I just shot one shot. And then all of a sudden, I stopped breathing in the same way as it done, because I was like, yeah, I've got it, and it sort of got up. And it didn't go, but it got up and looked around, and you could see it weren't too happy. And then eventually it just walked off. So it was amazing, so because it's that amazing encounter with another being that were absolutely beautiful. And I felt connected with it. It was a wonderful experience because I felt I connected with the animal.
My thanks to Keith Moss, 35 years in the business. He has so much to share, and we'll be returning to Keith. And I'm hoping that, Keith, are you listening? We're going to do that live photo walk. That would be fun. And that's it for this week, and what a week for learning. Well, I think I've learned a thing or two at any rate. I think it's the first time I've considered that the thing I make art with, if photography is art, and there's a whole debate. Perhaps you could write in with that one, your thoughts on that particular one. But that thing that I make art with, i.e. the camera, is art in and of itself, as a thing, as a construct. We talked about being creative, didn't we? And if we get a little bit too precious about that word or the phrase, being a creative, love, being a creative. I'm certainly going to buy that book that was about resilience Matt Searles was talking about, and it was both a surprise and pleasure to learn how Matt deals with his mental health issues through mindfulness. Mindfulness, well, we'll come back to that again and again, as you know, on this show. That wonderful photography Chris Wilkins shared, his study of the very ordinary in terms of concrete and texture, turning it into fine art. Now, you know that I've carried not winning children's television show painting competitions for decades. And a life lesson, make sure you keep your camera bag zipped up at all times, otherwise you may invite some nasty critters into your bags. I'm itching to tell you more about my van lifing idea, but I probably should keep that to myself just for the moment. And look, all of our guests, all the letters, all the snippets and the clips that we've heard from those that have been before on the programme brought something to the, I'll try this again, the dark room in the light. No, I'm not sure that works. Edit that one out, Neil. All right. But indeed, especially Carl, thank you for your honesty, that honest mail about your family, which was, quite the moment when I opened up that email recently from you. So what do we play out with this week? Well, I'm going to choose something that when I first heard it reminded me a little of the gentle nature. I feel it's been a very gentle one this week, of Art Garfunkel. And so this is Gabe Price with a song called Friend to the End.
I am not a raincoat here to keep you warm. Then go back in the closet after the storm. I'm not a match simply waiting to burn. All I am is a friend, your friend till the end. I'm not your impression of a city wish. You loved more than everything you gave for it. And I'm not here to criticize the risk. All I am is a friend, your friend till the end. All I am is a friend, your friend till the end. Here to call you in for the things that you done or that thing that you did. And I'm not the shadow of anyone you've been. All I am is a friend, your friend till the end. All I am is a friend, your friend till the end. All I am is a friend, your friend till the end.
Gabe Price with Friend to the End. And that's it for this week. My sincere thanks to our guests once more, Valerie Jardin and Keith Moss, and those who are patrons. And of course, if you're interested in joining, you can do so on the link on the website, photographydaily.show. You'll find a link there. And for those wonderful supporters who are, well, tomorrow we're going to be pleading with you to read the label or the instructions after a dreadful error I made the other day. Or do we really need to read the instructions at all for our cameras, that is? Surely we should be, well, feeling at one with them. It should all be quite intuitive. Or is it? Our book club book is Subway by Bruce Davidson, and some words from an interview that is coming up in 2 weeks that you'll have an exclusive preview of tomorrow on The More Show on the Patreon channel. Next week's show features the rest of my conversation, split into 2 new chapters from Valerie Jardin as we talk documentary photography on the street, the do's, the don'ts, the kit that matters. Not quite the answer you'd get from a kit video on YouTube, though. And what the ethics and morals and law is of working with your camera on the street.
It's happened recently, actually. I photographed this young girl with a kite. Yeah. And I was walking on the beach. I stopped for a second, framed the shot, and I kept on going. And then all of a sudden, this woman runs after me and said, "Hey, did you take a picture of my daughter?" And I'm like, oh boy.
Music on the show from the incredible artlist.io. And I look forward to photographing with you, hearing from you, and talking with you next time.
Photography Daily is a Loading Zone production.